Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
November 1919, Milan, Italy. The night after a national election, outside Benito Mussolini's apartment, a crowd has gathered. They're carrying a coffin. His name is written on it. They're laughing. His movement had just received fewer than 5,000 votes across all of Milan. The Socialist got 190,000. His political career, by every reasonable measure, is over. Dead. The coffin is the punchline. 6 months earlier, Mussolini had stood in a piazza not far from here and given a name to something the world had never seen before. Nobody took it seriously then either. 3 years later, the King of Italy handed him the government. This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. On March 23, 1919, a small group of men gathered in a hall in Milan, Italy, and gave a name to something the world had never quite seen before. The man at the front of the room was a 35-year-old newspaper editor named Benito Mussolini. 4 years earlier, he had been one of the most prominent socialist journalists in Europe. Now he was founding a movement he called the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, the Italian Combat Leagues. Within 3 years, he would be Italy's prime minister. Within 6, dictator. The question most history books skip over isn't what fascism became. It's who built it and who paid for it. The answers are more uncomfortable than you'd expect. What was born in that room in Milan was not some ancient hatred dragged out of a dark corner of European history. It was something new, assembled deliberately from real grievances, real betrayal, and a political class that was absolutely certain it could use a dangerous man and keep him controlled. Understanding what happened requires holding 3 uncomfortable truths at once. The men who built fascism were not simply evil. The institutions that enabled it bear enormous responsibility, and the conditions that produced it have not gone away. All 3 are true. That's why March 23, 1919 still matters. Picture this. It is a cool Saturday morning in the Piazza San Sepolcro in the heart of Milan. The hall where they've gathered was arranged by local businessmen. I want you to hold on to that detail. It will matter more than you think. There are somewhere between 50 and 300 people in the room, depending on whose account you believe. Later, when Mussolini came to power, thousands would claim they were there that day. At the time, it was a small, fractious, arguing crowd. Look at the faces. War veterans, many from the elite RDD shock troops, men trained to attack machine gun nests with a knife and a grenade, ex-socialists who had broken with the party over the war, futurist artists who believed violence was aesthetic and that modernity required smashing the old, nationalists, anarchists, newspapermen. They don't have much in common except this. They are all, in different ways, furious. Mussolini steps to the front. He is compact and theatrical, with a shaved head and a jaw that seems designed for a political poster. He speaks about the mutilated victory. Italy's sacrifice in the Great War had been enormous, 650,000 dead, and what had it received at the Paris Peace Conference? Almost nothing. The lands Italy had been promised were given to others. The Allies treated Italy like a servant who had finished their errand. The crowd responds. They always respond to Mussolini. Let me build the clock for you, because the world of March 1919 is not the world we learned about in school. Most of us think of fascism as the thing that came before World War II, Hitler, the Holocaust, the swastika, a fully formed ideology that evil men believed in. But in Milan in 1919, fascism hadn't yet existed. It was being invented in real time, and nobody in the room was entirely sure what it was. Italy in 1919 was a country in crisis on multiple fronts simultaneously. The economy was shattered by the war. Inflation was vicious. Returning veterans couldn't find work. The Socialist Party had received 1.8 million votes in the most recent election and was talking openly about revolution on the Bolshevik model. Landowners were terrified. Industrialists were terrified. The parliamentary government lurched from coalition to coalition, unable to hold a working majority for more than a few months at a time. And then there was Mussolini himself. His biography is the part of the story that most people don't know, and it changes everything. Benito Mussolini grew up the son of a blacksmith in Emilia-Romagna. His father read Marx at the dinner table, and Mussolini absorbed it. As a young man, he moved to Switzerland and became a socialist agitator, organizing workers, writing pamphlets, and getting arrested. Back in Italy, he rose to the position of editor of Avanti, the official newspaper of the Italian Socialist Party, one of the most influential left-wing publications in Europe. In 1912, he was elected to the party's national directorate. He was a socialist star. Then the war came and broke him loose. Mussolini wanted Italy to enter the war. The Socialist Party did not. They expelled him in 1914. He started his own newspaper, Il Popolo d'Italia, funded in part, and this is the detail that should genuinely stop you, by the British Secret Service, paying him to publish pro-war propaganda. He joined the Italian army, served in the trenches, and was wounded when a grenade launcher accidentally exploded during training. So the man who would become the first fascist dictator was, at a critical moment in his formation, on the payroll of a foreign intelligence service. If that makes you uneasy, hold that feeling, because the story of who funded Mussolini is only beginning. He came home with his socialism in ruins and his nationalism burning. The veterans around him felt the same way. They had sacrificed everything and received nothing. The people who had opposed the war were still out there, apparently winning. That combination of grief and rage is the raw material of what gets built in Milan on March 23, 1919. Here's what the evidence tells us about the founding meeting, and I think this is the most instructive part of the story. Mussolini's first program, the actual platform he put to a vote that day, was a jumble of left and right that makes no ideological sense unless you understand he wasn't really building an ideology. He was building a coalition of the discontented. For the left, women's suffrage, the 8-hour workday, a minimum wage, confiscation of war profits, and abolition of the Senate. For the right, aggressive territorial nationalism, paramilitary organization, and the glorification of the war veteran as the authentic Italian. There's a name for deliberately abandoning ideological consistency to maximize the people you can recruit. Mussolini was far more concerned with tactics than with ideas, as one historian put it. He appeared in those early years as successively champion of the League and then nationalist, as socialist and then conservative, as a monarchist and then Republican. He kept all his options open. The results were humiliating at first. In the November 1919 elections, Mussolini's movement received fewer than 5,000 votes in Milan, compared to 190,000 for the Socialists. The Socialist Party held a mock funeral procession outside his apartment, carrying a coffin with his name on it and parading it down the street. Mussolini briefly considered immigrating to start a new life as a novelist. I find myself thinking about that moment, the near miss, the coffin with his name. What if the parliamentary government had simply functioned? What if the landowners had not decided they needed the black shirts more than they needed the rule of law? This is the moment in the story where a different outcome was still possible. And it's the moment when nobody made the choice that would have produced it. Because here's the truth that the elites of 1919 Italy need to answer for. The Fasci grew from a few thousand members at the end of 1919 to more than 300,000 by 1922. That growth was not organic, it was purchased. Landowners across northern and central Italy began paying Mussolini's squadristi, roving bands of black shirts in trucks, to break strikes, burn union offices, beat labor organizers, and destroy socialist and Catholic peasant cooperatives. The Italian government, which shared the fascists' hatred of socialism, mostly looked the other way. Police often stood aside. Judges found reasons to dismiss charges. Thousands of people were beaten. Hundreds were killed. Opponents were forced to drink castor oil, a humiliation designed to incapacitate and degrade and run out of town. The offices of Avanti, Mussolini's old socialist paper, were attacked 3 times and eventually shut down. This was not a popular uprising. It was a sponsored terror campaign, funded by men who believed they could use Mussolini and discard him once the socialists were crushed. When Mussolini organized the March on Rome in October 1922, some 30,000 black shirts converging on the capital, King Victor Emmanuel III faced a choice. The army could have dispersed them. The generals told him so. Instead, the king invited Mussolini to form a government. He handed him Italy. The wealthy elites who had funded and enabled the black shirts watched the man they thought they controlled walk through the door they had opened for him. Within 3 years, opposition parties were dissolved. Within 4 years, the free press was gone. It took 6 years from the founding meeting in Milan to the formal proclamation of a fascist state. That's not a long time. We're still living with the consequences of what was invented in that room on March 23, 1919. Not just because of what Mussolini himself did, the invasion of Ethiopia, the alliance with Hitler, the persecution of Italian Jews, and the catastrophe of World War II. But because of what he demonstrated was possible, he showed the world a template. The template goes like this. Identify real grievances. They don't have to be manufactured. Genuine economic pain, genuine institutional failure, and genuine humiliation will do. Find a movement that absorbs the discontented across ideological lines by offering emotion and identity rather than a coherent program. Build a paramilitary presence that the establishment finds useful against its enemies, so it looks the other way. Use democratic institutions to reach power, then close the door behind you. Count on the people who think they can manage you to underestimate you until it's too late. I'm not drawing a direct line from 1919 Milan to any specific place in 2026. History is not a machine that produces the same output from the same input. But the pattern is worth knowing. It's worth recognizing. Hannah Arendt, who fled Nazi Germany and spent her life studying totalitarianism, wrote that the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced ideologue, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction no longer exists. She was describing the end point. Mussolini's contribution was showing how to get there from the beginning. From a piazza, a newspaper, a movement with no clear ideology, but enormous emotional force. What do I make of the men in that room in Milan on March 23, 1919? They were not all monsters. Some of them, the veterans especially, were men broken by an industrial slaughterhouse of a war, and then told their sacrifice meant nothing. That grief was real. The betrayal was real. I respect what they endured, even as I find what they built abhorrent. Mussolini himself was genuinely brilliant in certain narrow ways. A skilled propagandist, a reader of crowds, and a tactician who understood that political coalitions are held together more by shared enemies than by shared beliefs. He was also vain, reckless, morally hollow, and catastrophically wrong about nearly everything that ultimately mattered. The businessmen who paid for the black shirts thought they were buying protection. The king thought he was managing a crisis. The parliamentary politicians thought they could co-opt a useful strongman. Every one of them made a calculated bet and lost, and took millions of other people down with them. All of that is true, and the most honest thing I can say is this: none of them thought they were building fascism. They each thought they were solving a more immediate problem. The distance between the problem they thought they were solving and the thing they actually built, that's the distance history always forces us to travel. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, sit with a few questions. When does a movement's real grievance stop justifying its methods? At what point did Italy's establishment cross a line they could no longer step back from? And did they ever ask themselves that question honestly? And when you see a political force that thrives on emotional intensity and contempt for institutional norms, what do you actually do with that information? Because that's what March 23, 1919 teaches us. Not just about how fascism was born, but about the very human habit of believing that dangerous forces can be borrowed and then returned when we're done with them. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.